So hi everyone, welcome to our After the Pandemic and Engineering Together series. Today we are going to speak to some young people in the Tees Valley and in the Glasgow area to talk about what engineering and skills and green skills they've got for the future. If I ask those that aren't on the panel to please put yourself on mute and turn your videos off, that would help a lot with managing the webinar, and there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. If we put them into the chat, that would be great. So I'm actually chair of Engineering Together, and I'm here to introduce Zoe, who's our excellent panel chair. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Thanks for arranging it. So yeah, my name's Zoe. I'm Principal Chief Executive of Middlesbrough College. I'm delighted to have a panel here today of 6 young people from secondary school up to master's degree, from Tees Valley up to Scotland, to give us their views on a range of issues related to sustainability and helping protect our planet. And it's right that we tackle this topic now and don't lose momentum after the COP26 summit, that we keep that movement going, that we listen to young people, and that we as educational establishments really take heed of what young people's views are and make sure that we're playing a role in leading forward this topic and this drive for the future. Because when I think about education, it's quite a broad topic today, and I'm sure we'll have lots of varied views on this. But the topic, are we training for a greener future, can mean multiple things to different people. So, you know, it could talk about education of everybody in the education system, from primary, secondary, colleges, universities. It could talk about our role as advocating that in the community and how we get that message out, because education is so vast that it has a big connection with employers, with businesses, with charities. It could talk about how we as employers in education, in the schools and college and university system, and as managers of huge estates across the country, play a leading role to make sure we're energy efficient and that we're leading from the front. It can also, as Paula alluded to, touch on the topic of, are we actually training the right skills? Are we producing the next generation of people who can put solar panels or engineering heat pumps or innovate and invent the next big green revolution? So there's many directions that this topic will go into, and I'm sure there's great opinions here on the panel, and I'm sure that we'll get some questions as well from people who've logged in today. And obviously we're going to share this this video online on YouTube afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to start off and go around the panel, and I'll ask each panel member to just introduce themselves, say where they're currently studying, and spend 5 minutes or so about why they're passionate about this topic and what their particular angle and what their views are. So I'm going to start off with Chloe Armstrong. So hi Chloe, thank you for getting involved. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're particularly interested in and why you're here today?
Hi, so I'm Chloe. I'm studying in biology, psychology and maths here at Middlesbrough College. And I'm really interested in the environment. I have been since I was little. I've always been recycling and really getting involved in the environment because my grandma has an allotment and it grows everything organically. It's always really interested me, especially that part of it. The reason I'm here today is because I think we need to teach the younger generations about sustainability, and one of the big things for me is growing our own food, our own resources, instead of relying on getting it across the world and increasing food miles and carbon emissions, growing things ourselves in season. That's one of the main things.
Okay, so you want to educate others, particularly around behavioural changes like growing your own food instead of transporting it from the other side of the world. And great to hear your granddad's got an allotment, and that's great. Get your hands dirty, I love that, and that you're cycling, so you're actually doing those things that can make a difference. So thank you for that, Chloe. So I think we're going to go onto the online panel. So Shauna, if you just want to unmute, that's fantastic. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're studying and where your passion comes from, and anything you want to contribute to this discussion today.
Hi everyone, my name's Shauna. I'm a student at the University of Glasgow. Thank you for having me at this event. Looking forward to hearing so many different perspectives. I'm taking part in this event because I think it provides an opportunity to have a really interesting and varied discussion. I think training is so important The reality of our current situation is that we are going to need to make rapid and radical changes to most aspects of society, which is no simple undertaking. And I think lasting change starts with how we are being trained. I also think that greater climate awareness has resulted in a greater level of climate anxiety, felt by many, but particularly younger generation. I can think of no better way of combating such anxieties than feeling like an active participant in the process of bringing about a better future. And I think training does that. As a dental student, if I had to give a direct answer to the premise, are we training for a greener future? I think my current answer would be no, but with the caveat that there are plenty of creative and clever people who could convert that to a yes. So I'm hoping as a student dentist, I can contribute the healthcare considerations to the discussion today. The pandemic has created a lot of challenges and brought about a lot of changes to dentistry, some of them beneficial for the climate, but some of them definitely not. And I think climate issues are health issues, and that we need to be thinking more about the role that healthcare providers have. However the green future ends up looking, we'll hopefully be rid of some sectors, cough, cough, fossil fuels, but hopefully the care sector will still be at the centre of our communities. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Shauna. So you're interested in the role of healthcare in driving that change, but particularly interested in the role of training and educating people so that they can become not just advocates of change, but active participants in change. I like that phrase. I think that was a good angle that we'll perhaps come back to a little bit later, how we move from us talking about it to changing behaviours. So thank you for that. So we're now going to move to Millie. So Millie, if you just want to say a little bit about who you are, where you're studying and why you're passionate about this topic.
Hi, I'm Millie. I'm fourth year at Falkirk High School. I am currently in the education system and learning about climate change and how it affects us all. And I can say from my point of view that not enough is being done in schools to teach my generation how to combat climate change in ways that they can do that themselves. Despite the media coverage and everything like scientific evidence, people in my classes who have taken geography still do not believe that climate change is a real thing. And I think that that is a massive problem. As I'm part of the generation that climate change will affect, I think it's really important that when opportunities like this come around, that people will step up and talk about it. And I'm really excited to be here and learn from everyone.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Millie. So clearly very passionate, studying it at school, but don't think it's going far enough. And interestingly, still seeing a lot of disbelief in around the school system. So again, that's probably something we'll come back to later, is how we can convert the people who still don't believe it's real and educate them to not only believe it, but to actually change behaviours as well. So we'll come back to that. Thank you for Millie. And now we're going to Zoe online. So Zoe, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're passionate about this subject.
Hi, so my name's Zoe and I'm up in Glasgow. In 2020, I graduated from mechanical engineering with financial management, and I've just completed an MSc in sustainability and environmental studies. So my undergraduate degree, I focused on the technical side of heat pumps and financial feasibility of heat pumps, but then I sort of realised that in a world where technically and financially we can support widespread deployment of heat pumps specifically, actually we don't have enough people to get this done. So I think the government aims to have 600,000 heat pumps deployed every year by 2028, but in 2019 we sold 35,000. Also, the Heat Pump Association thinks that we need 69,000 installers by 2035, but we only have 2,000 at the minute. So I think it's quite obvious that there's a big issue. There's no real apprenticeship route into the sector. And I think as a sector which emits 20% of our greenhouse gases, it's a huge, huge challenge for us. And there's also huge knock-on effects of not having the correctly skilled workforce. So things like, you know, if you don't have the quality of skills, you'll be installing heat pumps which cost a whole load to run. So since lower income households spend a much higher proportion of their income on fuel, this will disproportionately affect them massively. So there's much wider impacts of skills. And I think as well as the speed of getting to net zero, making sure that it's truly sustainable and that we're creating sustainable, good quality jobs, creating good quality opportunities for people is really important, as well as, you know, reaching net zero.
That's great, thanks Zoe. So that's another interesting angle, isn't it? Are we training enough people to help make this revolution? And at the moment it's very, very slow, very, very low numbers. I think it's changing, but is it changing quickly enough? An interesting angle you threw in at the end there about environmental poverty, I think it's sometimes being called, and the fact that actually cost is going to be a barrier for many households in actually making the change that sometimes they want to make, but they can't afford to make. So again, that might be something we come back to a little bit later as well. And you've obviously got a lot of depth of knowledge around heat pumps, so we'll probably get into that a little bit more as well as the conversation goes on. So we're now moving back in the room. So we have Mia here in Middlesbrough College. So Mia, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're particularly interested in this topic.
Well, I study biology and chemistry at college, and I don't necessarily cover much about climate change in anywhere. And I know specifically from school that I didn't cover much there either. The way I actually learned about climate change was from watching documentaries on Netflix. So clearly, maybe it's just the way I've been raised in the schools I've attended, but it doesn't seem like we're teaching enough about the situation that's occurring. Like, yeah, COVID specifically, it was everywhere. Like, you couldn't turn around without seeing it. Whereas climate change, it's the same level of catastrophe, and it's no different.
Yeah, that's interesting. So really what you're saying is perhaps it should be more mandatory in the core curriculum of schools all the way through, so that it's always a topic of conversation, rather than, I think what I'm probably picking up is it tends to depend on the teacher or the school or the college or the university as to how much we're educating the future. And you think it should be more of a standard approach because it's such a big, important topic. That's a really good point, Mia. Thank you for that. We'll come back to that, I'm sure. And last but certainly not least, we have Kyle up in Scotland. So hi, Kyle. Tell us a bit about yourself and why you're passionate about climate change and sustainability.
Hi, I'm Kyle. I am currently studying an HNC in Applied Sciences in West College, Scotland in Greenock, alongside my SVQ in Lab Skills and Life Sciences as a modern apprenticeship. The main reason that I'm here today is because there's simply not enough opportunities at all for young people to get their voices heard and get anything that they want done or improved upon actually managed in any sort of way. So getting a chance like this, given an opportunity to have my voice genuinely heard and hopefully speak for so many hundreds and thousands of people that don't have that voice. We are currently stuck facing a catastrophic future that's either going to be created or could be avoided, but that's going to be based solely on what we decide to do and how we decide to move forward. And sadly, we're currently stuck watching our government spend billions on fossil fuels rather than actually try and achieve any sort of goal. But we are beginning to run out of time, and soon we won't be running out of time, but we will have run out of time. And it's our generation that gets affected. It's the young people that are going to see the impact of this the most. And that's the main issue, and we have to act now.
Okay, that's great. So I'm sensing there a real frustration that your voice or voices are not being heard, and that the pace of change in government policy is nowhere near quick enough, and you want to make sure that the governments hear that voice. So, well, that's great. Well, thank you all for that introduction. I think that's given us some interesting topics to pursue. I'm just going to ask a few questions and see where the conversation goes before we ask questions from anybody logging on. So I'm going to start off with the disbelievers, because we're going to talk a lot, I think, about what we can do about the believers and how we change behaviour and how we use education. But I think a real starting point is those people who don't believe it's happening. So I'm going to start off with Millie, because you raised it first, Millie, and then we'll just open up a little bit of discussion, if that's okay. So how big an issue do you feel it is amongst young people? If you were to estimate amongst your classmates or your friends or peers, you know, are we talking 80-20? 80% believe it's an issue, 20% don't. What's the proportion of people that you think we need to influence on this topic? I'll start with Millie and then we'll open it up.
Well, I can remember last year in my geography class, and the teacher asked us, like, put your hand up if you believe that climate change is a real issue. And I remember looking around just expecting everybody to have their hands up. And I remember seeing 2 or 3 individuals who didn't, and I was absolutely taken back by it. You know, they weren't asked to explain their reasons or, you know, why they didn't believe in it. But, you know, I was really interested to know. And, you know, you see it when we're watching interviews with like Greta Thunberg and like other influential people. A lot of people just lose interest or can, you know, kind of make jokes about it and, you know, make fun of all these people trying to make the change. And I think that just really shows how, like, people just don't see it as their issue. Yeah, and I would say if you're asking for like how many, I would say probably about 80% of people in my year probably believe in climate change, but only about 10% actually will do anything about that.
Okay, I'm going to ask other people, I'm going to ask a slightly different question. Do you agree that kind of 80-20? And then also, because I always wonder if there's 3 groups of people. There's those who don't believe, there's those who absolutely believe and want to make a difference, and then there's those who think it's too big a problem that it's almost pointless as well. So I want to, you know, how would you do that split? I'll ask, I think, Shauna, how do you think people fall, in your experience, into those 3 categories?
Yeah, I think probably going back to the history of climate change, then initially there was a lot more climate denialism. Whereas now I would say it's shifting in the other direction, where there's so much science, there's so much is known. It's certainly not in the media as much as it should be, but it is more than it was. So it's harder for people to deny that climate change is a thing. We also have, you know, you see it in front of your eyes. I know that in the global north, we're maybe not seeing the effects the same way the global south are, but we're still seeing increased flooding, and, you know, our summers are longer and our winters are harsher and things like that. So I think there's less people who will say that they deny climate change, but I think there's probably now that cohort of people are maybe more climate apathetic and are like, well, it's happening, but what can we do about it? Or what's my role in it? That sort of thing. I actually think it's really interesting that Millie said that, because I actually have a decade on Millie, and I remember being in school, and when we were talking about the climate change, I didn't do geography, but we did things in chemistry to do with pollution, and we would talk about climate change, but it was in that sort of gentle language. Whereas now I think because of people like Greta Thunberg, there's a lot more of this idea of an environmental crisis or the climate crisis, or, you know, a climate emergency. So I thought there was maybe more young people engaging with it, but maybe not.
Okay, so feel free to speak when I come to you next and say if you've got an alternative view to that. But if we assume there's kind of 3 groups, and there's a small set of deniers, and there's a bit of apathetic, and then there's a group who want change. Let's move to how we can best influence the change. And I think I'll probably come to Mia, because Mia, you've really felt that we just didn't have enough in our education system to help educate young people and get rid of the deniers, or convert the deniers, or educate the deniers, and also help people understand what they can do about it, which I think links to your point as well, Chloe. So what more can we do? Or is it really you returning that question on us as educationists?
I think it's mainly just teaching about it, because I have younger siblings and they've never even come across the topic. Like, they have no idea that all these like flooding and the new loads of these like natural disasters are all occurring purely because of this one thing that we can actually change.
Yeah.
But we're kind of turning a blind eye to it.
So does everybody feel that? Does everybody feel that there just isn't enough education in schools? Because I think it's variable, but you're obviously, there's a lot of people that you're in contact with who are getting almost nothing. So how many of us think there's too little, and how many think there's very little, if you like? So I'll just come to you, Chloe, since you're here.
I just don't think we're starting at a young enough age. Like, I first started to learn about it in year 9 because I took geography GCSE, but we didn't learn really about it in year 7 or 8 when everyone did geography. But like, I've got a little cousin, she's 7 and she has no idea what's happening. She has no idea the effect that it's going to happen on her when she grows up. And I think it's quite sad really that they don't know what's going to happen yet. And yet, if we started teaching them younger, they can maybe be the driving force to change it and make a difference in the climate crisis. Because even people younger than us now, they are going to, us along with them, are going to be the driving factor in changing the world and how we perceive it all.
Okay, so Kyle, you gave me a sense of frustration that your voices were loud as young people, but policymakers and government aren't listening. So picking up the point and the thread we've just had, can we make that voice even louder? Can we start at a younger age? What's your views on that?
I don't see why not. I don't see why there's some sort of cut-off age of when you can start learning about climate change or not. I think the earlier we start education on the climate crisis, you can only see positive and a positive impact from that. You're either going to get an entire generation growing up knowing the dangers of it and how to combat it, with maybe the obvious few people that don't agree with it or will have their own opinions and they'll go the opposite way. That'll come with everything. But if you start educating people from a very young age, there'll be no reason to get to an adult and not know what's going on or not how to make changes. I didn't get taught a single thing about climate change in any education, whether it was primary, high school, college. I've not ever heard one person tell me that we're going to learn about climate change. And as well, it has been just from watching documentaries or doing my own research or just being up to date on the news. But it's such a basic thing to be educated on what's happening in your world. Like, this is where we live, this is our home, and it's up to us to be able to fix it and to be able to continue living here.
Okay, so Zoe, you talked a lot about how we're training. It's a slightly different, well, it's quite a different angle actually, but it's an interesting one about the role that education has to play on actually training the next generation of people who are going to be, physically making a difference by changing, for example, a fossil fuel gas boiler into an air source heat pump. So tell us a little bit more about that, and how concerned are you that we're really not going to have these people, and that's going to be the barrier to this getting rolled out?
Yeah, so I think for me, with quite a bit of research behind me in heat pumps from lots of different angles, I think it's probably the biggest barrier that we have is training people to actually get this deployed and get this done. I think one of the things that's quite interesting, especially in that sector, is that at the minute gas boiler installers are a bit older. So there's that sort of reluctance to say you've got 10 years left in your career to why would you retrain? Why would you want to retrain and do something completely different? So then you have an older generation that aren't equipped to train the younger generation. So there's that issue. And then there's also the issue of, younger people coming up. I think maybe with, the discussion that everyone's just had there, it's quite interesting that there's quite a lot of, as Shauna said, anxiety around the issue. And I think although that is good to have some sort of urgency around reaching net zero, I think it can sort of put people off in a way. It can, if it's too scary, if it's too much of a challenge, it might actually put people off. And when you have an older generation not as willing to change, I think that those two problems together can create a bigger issue, which means that we don't have people moving in to the sector. And another issue is definitely apprenticeships. We don't have a proper apprenticeship to get people into. If we wanted to be deploying heat pumps at this scale now, or in the next few years, we needed them to be through apprenticeships yesterday. But we still have time, we can still get it done. But I think there really needs to be a focus on skills first to make sure that the transition is fully sustainable and that we don't have to go around fixing all the heat pumps that have been put in because they're all put in badly and going around. And, you know, I think there needs to be a reasoned response to the big challenge that we've got.
So just following on that, we've got a bit of a personal interest here at Middlesbrough College because we've just got a training rig for an air source heat pump, you'll be pleased to hear. And we rolled it out for the first time at our recent open event, and I have to say it was the most popular piece of equipment that we had on our open day because people were intrigued, and it was quite interesting because I was talking to a parent who happened to be a landlord who just didn't understand that this was coming down the pipeline and was very interested in what role he could play in his properties. So assuming for a moment that we can tackle the skills of putting the heat pumps in, is there another barrier about awareness of them, about cost? You mentioned poverty earlier. Who's going to foot the bill to make these changes if we can create the skilled workforce and we have the technology to do it?
Yes, I think that is another big issue. So at the minute we have grants that people can get, or we had the renewable heat incentive where people could get grants to get a heat pump or solar panels, whatever. But typically the people that take advantage of those grants are the people that probably could have afforded it anyways. So then you've got a situation where the people who could have probably afforded it anyways take advantage of, you know, the savings from that. And then you've got a whole lot of people that quite soon down the line might be penalised with a gas boiler ban, or they might be penalised with a tax on fossil fuels. So I think that's where a mass market scenario where you have high deployment numbers, so you have a really skilled workforce, actually makes a big difference. So I think there was research by Eunomia in 2020 which said that the biggest difference that could be made to the heat pump sector would be to have a big training base, a big workforce. So if you've got everyone trained, actually that brings the cost down for households the most. It's not really the equipment, it's just actually getting it in, because you can do it at such a faster pace, and you know, you just slash the cost. So I think that actually it all comes back to skills in a way. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So let's flip around a little bit more. So Shauna, you talked about the role of health. So what role do you think health can play in setting a leadership in this area? Give us some examples of where you think they could go further as a sector.
Yeah, so if I was like to consider within our current course, so I'll talk about maybe perhaps student training, because student training influences the dentists of the future, so that then in turn influences the profession. So within our current course, I think there's lots of moments of teaching where I can see the implications for green dentistry. For example, preventative dentistry or certain emerging technologies where it really has the potential to give a much less wasteful form of care and a much more sustainable form of care. And I think these do represent missed opportunities where our training could be coupled to the climate crisis, but it's just not being done. And I think that's largely because as healthcare professionals, we consider our roles entirely distinct from climate or environmental issues. So I think the biggest thing would be probably a change in mindset first, and thinking that as professionals, we should be regarding the climate crisis as a fundamental responsibility, because we do have a contributory role. I think we think that because we have the noble goal of providing people with good oral health, that we can disengage, but I don't think we can disengage with the fact that, like most sectors, we do have a carbon footprint, we use a lot of energy, we use materials such as metals, plastic, chemicals, radiation, all of which are going to have an environmental impact. And I think we have a duty to consider and mitigate those. And I think actually it's all out there. You know, there's lots of literature out there on how to make dentistry more sustainable and the changes that can be made. I think the problem is we're just not implementing them. We need to see that as part of a healthcare professional's duty. As much as we have a duty of care to our patients, we should have a duty of care to our planet, I think.
And that's really interesting, because if you look at some of the changes we've seen over the recent decades, if governments want to make a change, they often put some law in. So you'll find many public sector bodies at the moment, if ever they write a report about spending money on X or Y or Z, they will have to, at the end of it, consider risk or financial or GDPR or whatever it is. They'll be asked to consider various things. And, you know, maybe what you're saying is it's time that all institutions, and maybe we start with the public sector because it is such a huge part of the economy, considers climate in every decision. Is that basically what you're saying? Rather than it being an afterthought and only being added on some decisions, it should be core of every decision.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's go back to Kyle. Kyle, I think it's been said today already, and I've heard it many, many times before, and I think I'm feeling it in this panel today, that young people feel that they're obviously A, going to be the recipients of the change, but B, that they care more. So let's sort of throw this debate open a little bit, because I look at older generations who maybe would never dream of buying a bottle of water, and maybe would wear the same jacket for 3 years. And so what do you think the role is about the commercial and the advertising side that young people, you know, are probably more influenced by? And how do you think there's more we could do there? And if there is it the commercial side of things, or is it the behaviour side of things that we should focus on? There's a lot in there, but let's open this one up.
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think there's also just that, again, the lack of education, because there's probably a lot of people out there that don't realise that, like, your online shopping and all this all comes at a cost. It all has their own carbon emissions, and I don't think people genuinely realise this. I think they see it as the sort of obvious things like fuel and like driving your car instead of taking the bus, that sort of stuff. So I think it does come down to education. I think for a lot of this stuff is that we are just not educated nearly enough to know what sort of impact we're having every day.
Yeah. So it's educating at all levels, really, isn't it? And I'm guessing from earlier the comments about the disbelievers, you know, they will be getting their view from somewhere. So I think it's perhaps a whole population education as well. So let's go back to Chloe, where we started, because you gave some good examples, didn't you, of going to your granddad's allotment, cycling, behavioural changes that you know start to make a difference. So what more can we do
I was
to
actually
encourage that?
having a chat with my grandparents about this panel the other day, and they were giving their point of view on the environment, because they are quite eco-friendly.
Yeah.
In the one where, even though they are an older generation, they do believe in climate change greatly. And because it came on the news, we were having a chat about it. And one of the big things they pointed out was the introduction of plastic into the economy,
Yeah.
and how much more convenient it was for people. So we are very dependent on it now. They were saying specifically about milk bottles. All of our milk bottles are plastic at the moment. But they used to get them delivered to the door by the milkman in glass. You used to give it back to the milkman.
Yeah.
And it'd be recycled, reused, and you'd reuse it for as long as the glass bottle was there, really. And even then you can recycle the glass.
Yeah.
And they were just saying how much more convenient plastic is now, which I think is a bit of a problem, really, because that's the commercial side of it. As you were saying, it's so like webbed into our world that you can't get away from everything we look at as plastic.
Yeah.
And I think we need to change that massively, and need to kind of get it out of our systems in a way, because it's literally inside of us at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Microplastics and everything like that. And
Yeah.
everything about
It's a great point, isn't it? And every time there might be a scare in a supermarket about a food contamination, the solution is to wrap it in plastic.
Yeah.
And us as a population feel much more comfortable then, because whatever the issue was around life cycle or contamination or risk to, you know, baby food or whatever the particular topic of the day is, the answer is often wrap it in plastic, put a sealable, and we're all, you know, recipients and grateful for that protection, but it's creating another problem. So it's a very complex topic. Right, where should we go next? I think I've seen a couple of questions coming in. So there's certainly a comment. So in my teens and early 20s, I was a climate activist. It didn't seem to make a difference. I'm now in my 50s and it's heartening to see that more young people than ever are active and doing something about it. Disappointing though that it's been 30 years and all that time has been wasted. I'm pretty sure everybody will agree with that. Thank you for that. I think that's Julie, isn't it? Yep. There's a note there for us all. There's a new GCSE in natural history coming in. Question, do we think people will pick that? Well, do we think schools will offer it? Do we think students would pick it if it was there? Well, let's go to Millie.
Could you quickly repeat the question? Sorry, my audio cut out.
That's okay. There's a new GCSE coming in natural history. Do you think it will be popular amongst young people if schools offered it?
I think right now I know geography is quite a big topic taught in my school, but I don't think climate change is not often seen as much of a relatable topic, and I think that's partly why people like with the online shopping, they just don't understand their footprint because they don't get that everybody's contributing. And I think if it was taught in a topic, it would be brilliant if people took it. But I think trying to get people to actually be interested enough in the topic to take it as a qualification level subject would be quite difficult to begin with.
Any other views on that? Mia?
I think it's less of having a very specific topic, like to get more people in the specialist areas, but more of like a general knowledge.
Yeah.
Like when you're saying about the online shopping, like people see having to buy plastic bags as an inconvenience, but they don't see why they actually have to reuse their bags. Yeah. Like it's knowledge that we need to be teaching.
So you're more of an advocate for much more general knowledge for everybody, rather than creating more people who have a deeper knowledge, but we haven't educated everybody else. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, anybody on the panel want to add to that? Nope. So there's another question there that you might be interested in, Zoe. It's just a note that, and I think I can concur a little bit with this from a college perspective, that we're training up installers, but the demand actually for the heat pumps and to install them in the homes, possibly because of cost, is low. So, and there's often this kind of sort of cycle at the start of these things where you need demand to be enough for the installers to get the jobs, and if they don't get the jobs quickly, they end up retraining to be something else. And it's a familiar thing in education, that cycle. So it probably needs some government impetus to get that demand flowing, so that the skills can then, and so that more people want to train in that field. So that's a made.
I would say on that as well. Sorry, I need to go, Paula. Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think capital cost is probably the biggest barrier. As well as that, I think heat pumps are getting a lot of bad press at the minute with poor installations, and it means like no one's house is heating up, like gas, like their electricity bills are huge. But I think a big issue in that is also that we, again with education, we need to educate the general public a bit more about the benefits of heat pumps and a lot of other things, like like with plastics, like there are co-benefits to cutting these out. So plastics, we're reducing plastics, the microplastics that we ingest, but with heat pumps, you can end up, if they're installed correctly with correct insulation, you can actually lower your electricity bills. It can be better for your health. There are co-benefits. Things like having a gas boiler in your house is actually like, it's not the safest thing. There are incidents where there's gas boiler explosions in buildings. So there are wider benefits, and I think that's another place where education comes in, is educating people, not just we need to get this done for carbon reasons, but actually co-benefits, making sure that everyone is on the same page, and yeah, I think that would help create a mass market scenario where the capital cost was reduced. Because at the minute, it's a sort of chicken and egg thing, like when do you train people up, because no one wants it. It's like that cycle that you were talking about.
So let's just fast forward and move ourselves into a wonderful world where all your ideas have come to fruition. We're training all the way through from primary, secondary, college, university, so everybody's really well informed about the realities of climate change, the causes of climate change, the things we can do to change behaviours to alleviate it. And let's assume that governments across the world have got the money to stimulate the green revolution, and so that policy across the world is starting to change, removing fossil fuels, getting more sustainable methods of energy, and so on and so forth. Is there another barrier? And is that the busy lifestyles that people have? Because I look at many of the causes. So why do we now shop online instead of locally? Because it's easy, but it comes in cardboard and it's shipped in lorries, and a lot of it comes from overseas, but it's easy. And that trend is going up and up and up. And you can use that as an example. So is there something else about, and it maybe comes to the point we made earlier about how we put it at the heart of everything. Is there something about how we can combat the reason people default to things that they might even know isn't environmentally friendly, but right now it's easier? And how could we tackle that? How can we tackle that? Because that's a really big cultural shift we're looking for there, isn't it? So let's start off with Millie.
Well, I think that there's always going to be a problem, because if something is available to you in an easier way, you're going to do it that way. And I think just by making experiences of things like going to the shops or, getting clothes or whatever, by making things experiences rather than like a chore, then I think people would be more, they would want to be more involved in kind of going out and doing things rather than just being online.
So trying to create the value back into doing those things differently. Kyle, have you got a view on that?
I'm not completely sure, because there's that little bit in me that likes to have hope that we can change and that we do have the ability to make such a drastic change. However, based on observations up until this point, it seems like it's almost like it's embedded in us to take the easy route out at every sort of corner. And if online shopping means you don't need to get out your house on a cold winter's morning, then online shopping it is. Especially like coming to Christmas, I feel like 10 years ago it was constantly, shops were busy, you couldn't get anywhere, everyone was at Christmas markets, everyone was busy out for everything. But then it just seems to be like everyone just sits at home waiting for all their presents to get delivered for them to then give them out. And it does just seem like we're starting to fall into that, well, it's easier. And I think that's what we need to try and overcome the most, because we're not looking for easy way outs now. We're looking for the hard things that we need to really start putting into action.
Okay, Shauna, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think that question you posed is quite a difficult one, because you're talking about such broad societal change. But I think I'm going to link back to what Zoe was saying about kind of, it can be very easy, I think, to frame changes from the fact that we're going to have to sacrifice. So we're going to have to reduce consumerism, which there's no doubt that we are. We're going to have to get rid of our plastics and all these things that make life easy. And we're going to take away all your fast cars and things that you love. And there's no doubt there is going to be an element of sacrifice. But I actually think that while change can be daunting, it also provides a really good opportunity to reimagine a better alternative. And a lot of the solutions that are out there for climate change actually do lead to a better quality of life. And, Zoe was saying that very specifically about heat pumps, but you could take that, and that is my experience within healthcare as well. A lot of the changes that we would need to make to have a more sustainable type of healthcare actually would be better for us as healthcare professionals, because we would have a better work-life balance, but also would be better for our patients. So, and then what you were saying about this busy lifestyle, well, I'd go for a 4-day work week. and then people have time to tend to their allotments, and we can spread out the jobs more evenly and have less inequality. So I think there's people out there with good ideas and good thoughts, and actually the climate crisis doesn't need to be something that's completely scary. We could actually use this to be a catalyst for something much better on the other side.
So Chloe and Mia, then that's interesting. So what we're saying there is to have these big societal changes, which means we all have to value the simple things in life. It's almost a complete full circle of how humans live their lives. We have to see the value in that, and maybe we come up with some innovation like a 4-day week, for example, to start to reduce consumerism and so on. Do you have any views on any of that, and what does that make you think and feel when you look forward?
And just going back to your question for 1 second,
Yeah.
when you said that other governments have enough money to produce this change, did you mean the citizens as well? Because I think a large factor in not wanting to change is money.
Yeah, I think I was assuming we could remove all the barriers. So that was the kind of epiphany world that we've moved into.
Yes, everyone's able to afford.
Everyone's able to afford the change they need to.
Yes. Everything you need to.
Yeah, but they're still left with time.
Yeah.
And consumerism and ease.
Yeah, I think we need to change how society works. So leading on to the 4-day work week, we're so in our own ways, like almost like one works 9 till 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. And I think it'd be a very hard shift, and a lot of people would be against it to begin with. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how we'd go about it, to be honest. I think it'd take a lot of perseverance and effort to convince the majority to sacrifice what they like. It's convenient for them. Yeah. No one wants to go out of their way to go and do something. Yeah. Everyone wants to do it as quick as they can and as cheaply as they can.
But they're willing to see a value in it. Yeah. I think that's the point. I think we've just heard there. How do we create a value in getting, using your time differently instead of that quick satisfaction that we get from, instantly buying things, for example. So Mia, do you want to add to that?
Well, we can pinpoint exactly where the big change occurred, and it's like when McDonald's and other fast food brands started doing this 5-minute wait for your food, fast food, and Amazon introduced the next day delivery. That kind of thing has changed us. We're expecting it there and then. Yeah. And that kind of thing is also what's killing us. It's what's the big issue is. Yeah. Because if we took the time and we slowed down and then we found more efficient ways of doing it, then maybe we could reduce it.
Okay, now we've covered all sorts there, and I'm looking at the clock. We've got 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to go around one by one. We've obviously talked about the role of educating people through education systems. We've talked about the role of investing so that we can get these green energies in and the skills to do that sooner rather than later. We've talked about behavioural issues and how we can help people understand better what they can do to make a difference without it being too daunting. And we've talked about the bigger sort of societal changes in what actually we value. So give me a few takeaways, really. If you could change the world, and your final sort of comments, what would you really focus on to make the biggest impact? So I'm going to start at the top right there, Shauna.
That's a big question. I think from today I've taken away this idea of more general education in every sector. I think change on the scale that's required is going to have to come across every sector, which means the education also has to permeate through every sector. It can't just be niche. It can't be our wee personal interests. It needs to be something that everybody feels that they have their part to play. We have a sort of hero in health inequality, Professor Sir Michael Marmot, and he always says that healthcare is too important to be left solely to doctors. So I think probably my biggest takeaway is that the climate crisis is the same, and we can't just leave it to the climate scientists or the politicians or the Greta Thunbergs of the world. If we can all make our changes in our wee sectors, then that's a good start.
Thanks, Shauna. Millie.
I think my takeaway would probably have to be that, you know, everybody has a role to do in climate change. And I think that once people start to see the little things that they can do that maybe won't impact their lives much, that will make the biggest changes. And I think that, you know, broadening just people's general education on the topic and small things that they can do would really improve just the global kind of awareness of climate change and would probably limit the long-term effects.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Millie. Kyle?
Again, I agree with Shauna. With the whole education, it definitely has to be brought in from every level and in as many ways possible. As well as not just your general basic education, but there should be specific courses available to go and learn about this, the crisis, or where it's came from, or how it's got to where it is now, or ways on how we can improve and stuff like that. But I think most of all, as a species just trying to live right now on this planet, I think we need to continue to just persevere. I think we need to have a lot of hope. And I think we need to create a lot of hope ourselves as well. And we need to really stand together and make this happen.
That's great. Thank you. Zoe?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is in sort of all senses not to leave anyone behind. I think starting an education, making sure, I think there's a lot of chat today about how some people feel like they don't get that exposed to in education, learning about this in education, and making sure that everyone learns about it. And that's even including people that currently work in fossil fuel industries. So making sure that they're retrained so that we don't leave people behind and that we don't make these changes too expensive for people and things. So making sure we're all on an equal starting block.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, Mia?
I agree with what everyone is saying. It's just education. It's like getting the word out there.
Getting the word out there, educating at all levels. Yeah. And Chloe?
And I agree massively with Millie about we need to make small changes within ourselves to make larger changes as a society and a world, rather than just relying on the big companies and the governments to do things. We need to do it ourselves rather than just rely on something else, someone else to make a law, to make everyone else do it for us.
Okay, now I've just noticed a question from the panel, so it's awful chairing because it's a really good question. As a group of young people going to enter the workforce in the next few years, would you make a decision where to work based on their climate change policy? I'll start with Kyle.
Sadly, I wish I could say yes. However, again, it comes back to the financial side of it. I don't think I'm physically in a position where I could do that. Same like in my house, I have looked at all the green energies I could look at, but can I afford them right now? No. So it does sadly for myself and probably a lot of other people come down to that, the financial side of it as well.
Okay, Millie.
I will not be going into the workforce anytime soon, I don't think. But if I had to go into it now, I would probably just say I would do everything in my power that I could to find somewhere that is climate responsible. But I think, as Kyle was saying, it's like there's not many kind of climate change like responsible places that you know everyone can afford. So I do think that it does just come down to money.
Yeah, and there's no shame in that. I think it's a really good question, and that's why the challenge is so great and why it does need government intervention. But I'm just going to reverse the question for the other four panel members. Is there anybody who passionately would be prepared to hang the hat out there and say, absolutely, I would pick, if there was two even jobs, I would pick the one with the climate, or even I would take a slightly lower pay if they had a really great climate policy? Is there anybody who would go that far? No. That's fine. I think that's absolutely fair, and I think that's the complexity of this topic, isn't it? I think it really is. So, if I could summarise what I think I've heard, the role of education through all of the school system from a young age is critically important to raise awareness on everything. Environmental poverty and the cost of change has to be addressed through policy to remove the barriers as far as is possible. Maybe something radical, like all policies in all organisations, public, private, government, needs to be linked to the impact on climate for us all to take stock when we're making decisions. That was a good point I think made earlier. Small changes matter, and you've got to start with the individual, and they do all add up. And if we're going to make the big societal changes, we have to value things differently, including our own time and including community. And one thing I always say to my children is we came with the earth and we'll leave with the earth, because pretty much everything comes from the earth, and that's all we really have. So on that note, thank you very much for your time, everyone. You've been passionate, eloquent, given a great variety of views. We really appreciate you coming along and participating today. Hopefully you've learned a little and certainly got something out of it. And I'm going to hand back to Paula to close.
Great. Well, I've just got to say, wow, a massive range of views, and I think if we had our policymakers and other people in this room, I think they'd all say the same. Education, let's start with ourselves and making them changes ourselves and start trying to make that transition from monetary cost to true value. And once we actually start making them changes ourselves and educate ourselves, let's one at a time, however many people we can actually educate, let's take all the opportunities to do it in a nice, kind way, taking into consideration that everything is a balance and that everybody has their own decisions to make. And like somebody's put in the chat, thank you to everybody. We now feel hopeful for the future, which is absolutely great. So thanks to everyone that's partaken. Thanks to those that have listened. Thanks to Middlesbrough College for hosting it. And of course to Zoe, who's been our expert panel chair. So with that, I'll say goodbye to all of the people that are listening. And if the speakers stay on, that would be great. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone.